Everyday Theology, where we don't tell you what to believe or how to think, but discuss why people believe what they do and why it matters.
On this journey, we will speak with artists, curators, influencers, and pastors.
I'm Aaron Ross.
And I'm Ben Gomez.
All right, well, today we have with us Dr. Aimee Franklin. She is an associate professor of biology, and she did her PhD in neuroscience. And so today we're excited to have a conversation on how we as Christians should think about the mind, think about what the mind even is, the brain, what it matters for us, and maybe even get into some topics on mental health and even topics of sin, which is always a fun one, right? So thanks so much for being with us, Aimee, and we're glad to have you here. Yeah. So maybe you can start off by telling us a little about yourself, about your research, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I am, like you said, a professor in the College of Natural and Health Science. I teach anatomy and physiology, and I also teach neuroscience and have also taught for the psychology department, biological psychiatry or psychology.
So just everything.
Yeah, so anything brain related, I get an opportunity. If there's an opportunity to teach, I definitely volunteer for it. So I am actually an alum of Southeastern. So I graduated from Southeastern in 2007. And then went to the University of Alabama at Birmingham in the Integrative Biomedical Sciences PhD program, where I chose to study neuroscience and got my PhD looking at learning and memory and then learning and memory disorders in forms of autism and also mental disorders like Alzheimer's disease, neurological disorders.
Yeah, no, I think that's super important. I mean, I had a great-grandfather that had autism. It was a terrible thing to see.
If you won the actual name, which of my dissertation, which most people don't, it's,
just in case someone wants to do some light reading.
A little light
Tuesday
reading.
Night,
I would love for someone to read my dissertation. I know my committee did, but elucidating the role of GSK3 in Fragile X syndrome. So that is
wonderful. I don't have a clue.
Yeah, it's okay. I do.
That's good.
But I have a clue, but no one else does.
Right.
Yeah.
Ben's over here not saying anything.
Yeah, Ben is checked out.
Yeah, come on, Ben.
He's playing a video game.
I'm just learning. I'm like the average listener, just listening to two PhD people just go at it, have a nice verbal tennis match, and so I'm good.
Yes.
So maybe help us out a little bit, because I think that when we have the topic of the brain, like we all have one, right?
Yes,
but we don't necessarily all think about, what the brain is, and then why it matters. Like why thinking about how our brain functions actually affects us both as people, but also as Christians. Yeah.
So I actually decided to do my PhD in neuroscience because I had the opportunity, like I said, I entered at Integrative Biomedical Sciences program. So it could have been any body system. I could have studied cancer. I could have studied liver. After my first year, I narrowed it down to neuroscience because what was so fascinating to me is pretty much all the other organ systems in the body and the rest of the body we have figured out. We know how it works normally.
Yeah.
So we just have to figure out how to fix it when it's broken. But the brain is incredible because we actually have very little understanding of how it actually works. And we're trying to figure out how to fix it at the same time we're trying to figure out how it works in the first place.
Yeah.
So every other organ system, and some neuroscientists put it this way, every other organ system is like a puzzle that you're having to put together and all the pieces are flipped over and you've got all the pieces. But when you're studying the brain, you're trying to put this puzzle together and like 90% of the puzzle pieces are not even flipped over on the right side up. And you might not even have all the pieces there. And yet we're still trying to put this puzzle together. So it was very exciting to study neuroscience because no matter what you discovered, it was something new and important and relevant. But also it's challenging because, again, we know so little about how it works and functions normally. And I know when you take neuroscience courses and when you hear maybe neuroscientists talk or go hear a talk on the brain, it sounds like we know a lot, but really, admittedly, it's such a small percentage of we can't figure out how to implant memories into people, no matter what, Jason Bourne tells us,
say,
and
so
that sort of thing.
Inception isn't real?
Inception,
right?
I have not seen evidence of that being real. I don't want to say a hard no, but probably not.
Okay,
no.
thank you for not smashing all of my dreams today.
Yes.
So maybe explain that a little bit to us in terms of, because I think it's sometimes hard for people to recognize. Like, for instance, I'll go to a theology conference, and for the most part, I can sit there and go, "Oh yeah, I'm familiar with what they're talking about. It might be a little bit different. It might be odd or strange ways of thinking about it, but it's never anything like earth-shattering for the most part, even though we'll have some kind of important discussions on how it works. But how does that look like in terms of like talking about the brain? Like you're saying, like most of it we don't even understand.
Yeah. And from a Christian perspective, what most Christians know about the brain or the mind is that we're supposed to renew it. But that's really, what Scripture tells us to renew our mind. And so I don't know that Christians give that much thought to the physiological underpinnings of that. And what I mean by that is when we talk about mind, when we talk about thoughts, when we talk about taking your thoughts captive and those sort of things, these are not abstract things. Now you can't see your heart beating. It is still, there's a physiological process happening to make your heart beat. There are cardiac muscle cells contracting. And I think everyone appreciates that. I think everyone understands that there's like an electrical current going through your heart that's causing it to beat in a certain way. And we accept that. But for the brain, the idea of thoughts and emotions and the mind, it's hard to kind of wrap our minds around the fact that those are also physiological processes that are happening. Just like molecules have to react in order for the heart to beat, molecules have to react for you to think every single thought that you think, every emotion you feel, every thought that you think, every idea that you have is the result of certain synapses firing in a certain pattern, releasing a certain amount of neurotransmitter that's going to act on certain receptors, that it is an actual physiological process. So that can feel daunting, I think, to think about for a lot of people. But it is, to me, it's exciting. And I think it's important that we do try to understand that these thoughts and our mind and our emotions are not just abstract ideas. Yeah. They're physiological processes, or the result of physiological processes.
Fascinating what you just shared. What comes to mind is, it's been in the news recently of pastors, leaders. Obviously in corporate America, it happens just as often in the church. I think we just get shocked when it happens in the church of, people dealing with anxiety, depression. Yeah. Obviously in the news, a pastor in the Southern California took his life, and who was a big advocate of mental illness. And so when you're saying that these transmitter and these synapses are firing away, can you help us as an ordinary listener like myself, just kind of put that in layman's terms for a regular person will be able to have this happening, but somebody who has, anxiety disorder, OCD, PTSD, what happens in the brain is that. And then
Right. So, and I know I keep comparing, I might keep comparing the brain to other organs in the body, but it's, again, because people know about the heart, they know about the liver. The brain, again, is kind of a scary thing to think about. But when someone is healthy, they have a healthy heart, their heart beats, they have great cardiac output, they're not having heart attacks, they don't even worry about their heart. They're not thinking about checking their heart rate all the time, they're not thinking about checking their blood pressure all the time, they just have a healthy heart. Well, there is a healthy brain, and then there are unhealthy brains as well. But growing up in the church, my dad is a minister, and so I've grown up my whole life in the church, and the opinions that I have been exposed to, and not by my father, but by other people in the church, is that the brain and illnesses affecting the brain and unhealthy brains are not sicknesses and illnesses like you would think about coronary artery disease with the heart, that it's a sin issue. It's you need to pray harder. It's a spiritual attack. you just need to think happy thoughts. And I feel like the church, or maybe Christians kind of as a whole, if you were to group us all into one category and then slap an opinion on us, I think historically it has been, mental illness is a you problem and a sin problem, and you just got to figure it out, and you just got to pray harder and pray through it. But what is missing in that is that it actually is a sickness, mental illness, the ones you mentioned, OCD, depression, anxiety. There are, just like when a heart attack happens in the heart and things go wrong, and there are ionic imbalances that cause the heart to fire at different patterns and cause arrhythmias. You literally have those same or similar ionic imbalances, neurotransmitter imbalances in these conditions in the brain. So it's not a sin issue. It's not you wouldn't tell someone who's had 5 heart attacks or 2 heart attacks to stop taking baby aspirin in the morning and just pray harder. You wouldn't tell them to stop taking their blood pressure medication and just pray harder. But that's how we approach oftentimes thoughts and depression. And I actually had a bit of a crisis of faith when I went to graduate school, because I had grown up thinking and hearing all the time, people would be going through a hard time in church, and they would say, I'm just really depressed. I'm undergoing a spiritual attack, and I'm just really depressed and I can't get out of it. You guys pray for me. I feel like I'm being attacked spiritually. And so then I went to grad school and I started learning the intricacies, and I'll spare you the details, but the intricacies of
please don't.
How the synapses fire, and how literally every thought and every emotion, and you can cause a rodent. You can put it through a protocol and put a rat and a mouse, and it can show the symptoms of depression. And then we can trace that in their brains to neurotransmitter release, to action potential firing. And so then I had this moment, and I actually sought counsel from several ministers that I knew. And I thought, as a Christian, I think I'm supposed to believe that the enemy cannot cohabitate where God lives, where light lives. But we oftentimes blame mental illness on Satan. So are you saying that Satan has control over my synapses when I feel depressed? And I think that, so I had this moment of like, do spiritual attacks even happen? And what does that even mean? What do those words mean? And I still kind of working through that. Like, when I do believe in spiritual attacks, I do believe in spiritual warfare, but I think we attribute a lot of mental illness and things that we can't explain, like a heart attack, to attacks of the enemy, when really they're actual physiological sickness. Just like you wouldn't tell someone with cancer just to pray harder and it's a spiritual attack, you should not tell someone who's depressed to stop taking their medication and just pray harder.
Which I think, I have my own experience, right, with plane anxiety. Like, I don't like plane, and I've flown a lot of different places, sometimes on planes 12, 13, 14 hours. And I'll hate every moment of that plane ride. It's just, oh gosh, like I have to play certain movies to distract me. Like I can't even just like sit there and be okay with it.
What kind of movies?
Movies, honestly, that I've seen 1,000 times. Like something kind of like
more funny, funny
more
movies.
funny. Just try to like kind of forget that I'm on a plane. And I would always be told, you just need to pray.
Yeah.
Like if you just pray enough, that'll go away.
That peace that passes
Look,
all understanding.
I have, right?
Every time I get on a plane, I get
and
saved.
I've confessed too.
Like I get resaved every plane ride. And so do the pilots in my mind. I'm saving them by my prayer to make sure everything's okay. And it wasn't until I think I said, I want to find out what's going on. And I went and sought help in terms of kind of medicine and saying, what can I do? And of course, when I went to do that, they're like, "Oh no, you've definitely got this going on, and this will help you, right?" And like they gave me medicine to help me with the plane rides, and now I can get on a plane and be like, "Oh, okay, this is nothing. I don't really mind it." I mean, every once in a while, I still get that little twinge of like, "Oh boy," but it's interesting because I think as Christians, we want just that. We want to be able to explain it through spirituality sometimes, when maybe even like when in terms of like a heart attack, it's just because we haven't been healthy. We haven't been eating right, working out, haven't actually been doing the things that we probably should be doing anyways.
Right.
But what about that when that comes to the brain? Like, what do you think about, taking care of ourselves in relation to the brain and medicine as well?
No, that's great. So just like you need to take care of yourself physically exercise, eat right for your heart, there is some responsibility for us to take care of our brain as well. Exercise is great for the brain. Actually, there's a region of the brain. Everybody thinks that brain cells don't regenerate, and that's generally true, but there are a couple of two brain regions that do, and one of those is in the hippocampus. It's called the dentate gyrus, and it's a subregion of the hippocampus. If you've heard of the hippocampus, my husband always tells the joke, that's where hippos go to school. But the hippocampus, if you've heard of the hippocampus, you've probably heard of it in context with Alzheimer's disease. That's typically the region of the brain that deteriorates in Alzheimer's disease. But so there is a sub-region of the hippocampus where new neurons are constantly being made. And so you get all these new neurons, and there is tons of evidence, concrete evidence, and we're certain that physical exercise actually increases neurogenesis. And in patients who are depressed, they have decreased neurogenesis in this brain region, and exercise will enhance that as well, or sometimes better than an SSRI will. That doesn't mean you shouldn't take SSRIs. There are other effects of SSRIs than just on neurogenesis.
What's an SSRI?
Sorry. Most people might have heard of an SSRI. It's a popular class of antidepressant drugs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors.
All these big fancy words. That
so let me back up a little bit. One of the I no, we're not supposed to get into the nitty gritty, but just for those curious listeners.
Go for it.
Just for those curious listeners, serotonin is a neurotransmitter, and oftentimes in depression, there's less of it. So one way to boost serotonin's effects is we can't just give serotonin to people, but one way we can increase serotonin is to block its reuptake. So once it's released, it will hang around a little bit longer. So you kind of get an effect of like you're having the right amount of neurotransmitter released. So most people, I'm not a clinician. I need to make sure that I state that multiple times. I'm not an MD. I'm a PhD. I don't diagnose. I don't treat. I do have a lot of experience with mental health issues, though, personally.
My issues I need to talk about later.
Yeah, well, that's, I'll connect you with the right person. But a lot of people are on SSRIs to treat depression. So backing up, exercise is a great way of keeping the brain healthy, eating the right foods. But just like there are patients that will have coronary artery disease no matter what they eat, no matter how much they exercise, it is just genetically in their family. They can do all the right things, yet they will still be sick. So there are personal responsibilities when it comes to the brain, right? You can take care of yourself. You can exercise. You can reduce your risk for certain things. But there are conditions, and there are genetic components, and there are mental illnesses that are not of your doing, and most of them are not of your own volition. They are genetic. Again, most of them aren't single genetic causes, like this gene gets mutated, you have depression. These are multifactorial diseases, and that's another reason why it's probably so hard to accept for some people that they are physiological. It's like, okay, well, tell me exactly what causes depression. It's a bunch of different, it's a bunch of things that contribute to it. I think what's hard too is a lot of people have a hard time understanding how someone can go through these things, how someone can be experiencing depression, how, and I use this example, or I was talking about this the other day, and if you have a quote unquote healthy brain, whatever we understand that to mean, it's impossible for you to think the same thoughts as someone with an unhealthy brain. So saying something like,
that's so interesting. Yeah.
When you were told as a kid, I think you said that in the podcast, just to pray more, just to, I don't understand, just think happy thoughts, and maybe people didn't understand that, maybe you had circumstances happen to you that caused you to become depressed. And if those same circumstances happen to someone else, they might not become depressed. So it might be hard to understand. And they might say, well, listen, if I failed that same exam, my significant other broke up with me too, and they cheated on me, and I'm fine. But that's because a healthy brain is filtering all of life's stressors through a healthy brain. Whereas an unhealthy brain or a sick brain is filtering all of life's stressors and events through a different unhealthy brain. So it's impossible for me to understand what someone who's undergoing chemotherapy is going through. I've thrown up before. I've been sick before, but I'll never understand what it's like to have the constant nausea, the vomiting, the loss of hair. Like I can see it, but I'll never really get it. Yeah. And it's the same with mental illness. I can see someone having the effects of depression, but I can't ever really say, oh, I understand it, because my brain, thankfully, right now is not processing things that way. So I think the church has a difficult time grasping maybe that concept of, we don't understand why people are going through what people are going through, and we want to tell them just to get over it, but we're never going to understand why they're feeling the way they're feeling, because we all have different brains, we all have different experiences, we all have been exposed to different things, and we all different stressors and different life events affect people different ways.
And so, as you explained all that, right, and so eloquently put it, I guess the question for our listeners out there is, okay, let's say I did grow up like Aaron, right? And they told me to pray more. They told me to, just to lean in, and they told me that it's a spirit and we can pray it out. After hearing you, then how can I help? And so if my friend is, if my friend's depressed and my friend has anxiety, has any other types of phobia, OCD, what are things that I can help? Are there certain symptoms that I should be on the lookout for? Yeah. But how can I help? Not try to change them, not diagnose them. Obviously, you're not a clinician, neither am I. But what would you tell us? What can we do? Hey, listen, this is some advice that I would give any listeners out there. This is how you can help your friends that are dealing with any phobias or
So just as I would not suggest someone who has a friend with cancer to suggest them how to treat their cancer, I would not suggest that you tell your friends how to treat or how to handle their illness. And I would definitely encourage, if you have friends, if you yourself, again, I am not a clinician, but if you have friends or you yourself are struggling, to seek professional help. I truly believe that one way God heals is through physicians and through medicine. And when Jesus healed the blind man in the New Testament, he didn't say be healed and he was healed. He actually spit in the mud and made a salve and made like a medication and put on his eyes. Is kind of how I like to think of it. So I do think God uses a little mask on the eyes. I do think God uses medicine, and that is one of his healing, how he chooses to heal sometimes. And so I would recommend always encouraging others to seek help from professionals. You wouldn't try to give advice to to someone with a broken arm. If your friend breaks their arm, you're not going to go try to reset it or say, well, let me just talk to you about that broken arm and how does that pain make you feel? No, you're going to send them to a professional. But one tangible thing that maybe you could do or the church could do is to destigmatize it, where it is okay to get help. And it's not a sign of weakness, and it's not a sign of failure, and it's not a sign of, oh, I just don't have it together, and look at all these other people, they have it together, and I'll be admitting defeat if I can't. And why can't I get this right? Yeah. To destigmatize that. And you're not suffering from depression because of sin. You're not suffering from depression directly from sin. You're not suffering from depression because you've done something bad. There's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to be embarrassed of. People in church all the time stand up and ask for prayer for their kid who broke their arm or their friend who's going through a hard time, with finances or something like that. But we like to hide mental illness and, don't talk about it, hush, hush. And it's because of this stigma. So the one thing that we can do, those of us who aren't clinicians and medical doctors and that sort of thing, is we can talk about it when we have our own issues and again, destigmatize it and say, it's okay. It is a sickness and it is okay to get help. And not just okay, it's encouraged. You shouldn't, if you're sick, go see a doctor.
Yeah. I think that's why I'm happy in so many ways, just to kind of tell people about my own thing with the plane, right? Like, I mean, for someone else, it's like, oh, why are you afraid of planes? That's so stupid, right? Like, and I've even heard that. I'm like, oh, planes don't crash, right? And I'm like, well, there's a couple news articles on that.
But it's the safest way to travel, actually.
I've convinced people like, oh, I know the stats. I know that it's safer to get on a plane than to get in a car. And I'm like, but none of that.
Yeah, but you cannot control
just fixes it, right?
Physiological response, the autonomic response that you're having to what's going on in your brain. So what happens when you're on a plane is your brain is actually sending signals to your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and it's causing you to sweat and do all the. Yeah. You can't if someone feels like they're about to pass out, you can't tell them, well, just don't, just like snap out of it. No,
just don't pass out.
You can't control those things. You can't think your way out of it.
This brings up, especially dealing with theology in some way, this brings up a very interesting question, right? If there are things in our brains that we can't necessarily always control, whether healthy, unhealthy, how our brain responds is not like a thing that I can just say, you're going to respond in this way and do it. Yeah. What do we do when we think about kind of how we process or how we respond maybe to certain things as it relates to sin? So, for instance, someone who might get angry much easier than someone else, someone can take it and just go, oh, I can just let that roll off my back. And another person, they can't. Like, they hold on. They, like you said, that this whole like renewing of your minds, going way back in the podcast now, but like this renewing of your minds, we're like, just don't be angry about that. That's all you have to do, and then you're fine.
And at the same time, how do we not go to the other extreme, which is, hey, now that I know this, I'm just going to use that as an excuse that, hey, I'm just predisposed to be that way.
Yeah.
When maybe they're not. So
good. Thank you for the balance there.
These are really good questions that I wish I had the answer to, but I don't. I actually talk about these in some of the courses that I teach, that, some of the things that I think are universally within the church agreed upon as sinful, there are some physiological explanations to it. Anger, aggression, there can be different levels of testosterone in the brain and different levels of dopamine and serotonin. These are all neurotransmitters. Testosterone's a hormone, not a neurotransmitter. But we can actually, there are studies looking at people who commit aggressive crimes and looking at the neurotransmitter profile in their brains. And you can actually have correlations there. So where is that line of personal responsibility versus I've got this predisposition to this? And I don't have a good answer. I'm not a theologian. I ask that question to my students all the time, and we discuss it and we talk about it, but I'm sorry. Like I said, I wish I had a good. If I had the answer, I would be on more podcasts.
But I think it's almost good, maybe in some sense, to reflect on it, to not have an answer of some kind of line. Yeah. Of saying that's like, good. Here is the line. So as long as you kind of like can control it to this point, you're okay. But if you can't, then it's what's going on in your brain. I think
it opens up Pandora's box a little bit when I talk about it in my class, because we actually talk about if it is. If there are physiological changes going on in someone's brain that causes them to be a danger to society, then we start talking about the prison system. And is the prison system a punishment system or a reformation system? So should someone be, quote unquote, punished for doing something they are kind of predisposed to do? They do have some personal choice in that, but shouldn't it be more rehabilitative and try to correct that or try to fix that through medication or counseling? Or so is prison and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I typically don't share my opinions on the matter. We just talk about it, but how should we punish people who do make these choices, but they kind of have multiple strikes against them in trying to make good choices? So
I think if anything, I'd hope that would make even that conversation or this kind of idea make people a bit more ready to be gracious in their dealings with others and how they're being able to interact in the world based on maybe some things that their mind are pushing them towards.
Right. So when I teach this class, when I teach the psychology majors, a lot of them are going to be counselors, a lot of them are going to be pastors, and that sort of thing. And I tell them, I have to teach them about action potentials, and I have to teach them about the movement of sodium and potassium and chloride and all these ions, all the fancy things. But I always tell them when their eyes glaze over and I can tell they're like, I'm not a science major, I don't want to learn this. I always tell them, if you remember nothing else from my class, nothing else, like if you don't remember what an action potential is, if you can't even remember what a neuron is, and you just know where the brain is, just remember this: when you're dealing with people, that it is not a matter of you are sinful, you are bad, just snap out of it. I tell my students all the time, just remember how complex this is, and always err on the side of compassion. You don't understand what their brain is doing for them to make those choices. So always err on the side of compassion, not on the side of get out of the church, do this. If you're dealing with an alcoholic and everybody wants to just say, well, just quit drinking. Just stop. Yeah. Just stop. Well, they have a physical dependency on alcohol. A person who's not an alcoholic can just stop. A person who is an alcoholic can't
it just doesn't make
stop.
sense. It doesn't make sense that you just can't. So
So I tell the students, like, again, if you remember nothing, just have more compassion in who you're counseling and who's in your church and who's dealing with things, because the brain is complex and things are happening, and it's not always black and white. It's not always simple.
I think especially being a Pentecostal, or at least growing up as a Pentecostal, especially, and hearing about this all the time, there is something, like you mentioned before, to talk about spiritual warfare, and like, what does that mean when we talk about, this kind of spiritual reality that we also have. We don't just live in a physical reality, but there's also something else kind of beyond, or kind of inside of, or within our physical reality. And I think that's something, maybe I'm just saying this for our listeners, that we'll talk about later, right? And have like one of those conversations.
A future podcast.
A future one, so just keep listening, right? But I think a question I have, especially as this relates to, and this is a topic that's becoming more talked about and probably needs to be more talked about, but it's still a very sensitive topic, is depression as it leads to suicide.
Right.
And how we even kind of react or discuss the reality of suicide in these understandings, that sometimes when we talk about like the brain and being predisposed and having these kind of issues, suicide is an unfortunate reality that happens alongside these, like, because of what's going on in the brain. So maybe if you can walk us through some of that too.
Yeah. So I want to reiterate, I'm not a clinician, I'm not a counselor. So a lot of this is just my opinion. Right?
Information only.
This is just my opinion. My PhD is in neuroscience, but as you know, the brain is a very huge area of information, and I have a very, very specific area of expertise. So a lot of this are just things I've thought about and just kind of my opinion on that. But for me, the issue of suicide is a person who commits suicide has a sickness. Yeah. A person with a healthy brain will never get to the point where killing themselves is the answer or the option. Right. I think. So if you have a healthy brain, you'll never understand why someone did that. You can always find reasons why they shouldn't have. You could have done this. You could have done that. You could have done that. Why? They took the easy way out. They did this. But we can't understand that person was sick. And that was so a non-sick person would never come to that conclusion. So it's hard to understand why someone else would. So I personally believe that suicide is a symptom of a sickness. It is one of the symptoms, just like there are symptoms of cancer, and sometimes that's death. It is not the desired outcome. It is not what should be promoted. It should not be encouraged. What should be encouraged is seek the best treatment that you can. But sometimes treatment fails. And death occurs. Again, these are just my personal opinions and things I think about often. But that's kind of where I stand. I'm not asking anyone else to stand with me in that,
But I think it's, it's an important thing to ponder, especially how the brain relates to those issues, because again, like you said, and I think this is key, that sometimes it's just I don't understand, right?
Right.
Like I people in my life who have, unfortunately had that experience, right? Whether it's friends who have had family members or actually just friends themselves who have, died by suicide. Like you think about it and you do that exactly what you said, that, oh, if you just would have done this,
right?
Or we keep wanting to ask that question, why did you?
Yeah.
Why would they have? Or any of those questions, because our minds quite literally can't comprehend the reality that they were in.
We have different synapses firing with different amounts of neurotransmitter, and we cannot this is a really simplistic view of it, but we can't form those thoughts.
Yeah.
With a healthy brain, you can't get to that place. So it's again just hard to understand. But I hope with the knowledge that we can't understand it comes compassion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the plea for our listeners. So if you're tuning in, listen to Dr. Franklin, right? She's not a clinician. She's not an MD, but
I'm not even an expert.
But she's giving us the advice that seek help. So if you need somebody to talk to, please get some professional help. If you know somebody, be compassionate, understand where they're coming from. Don't just simply state and say, hey, let's pray. Let's go to this prayer vigil. Let's just get this anointing oil. Mental illness is real, and their synapse and their transmitters are not functioning and firing correctly. And so that's where the compassion and the love of Jesus comes in. So for our listeners, again, compassion, the road to compassion.
Yeah, I also do want to mention that there is hope. I do talk about there being sickness, and it is a sickness, and there is a physiological problem, but there are remedies to that, just like there are remedies to other physiological issues like a cold or, it might not be simple and it might not be easy, but I do want to offer hope that there are treatments for sickness, and that includes sickness in the brain as well. So I don't want to give the impression that, oh my gosh, my brain is sick. That just makes it even worse. I don't want to give a reason for more negative,
in our home,
feedback.
Anytime we have an emotional day, here normally one of the remedies that we use is Dairy Queen, a small Reese's peanut butter cup, Blizzard, extra stuff.
That'll cause a little dopamine, a reward, activating your reward system.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
And in some sense, if you aren't going through those things, to have that sympathy and compassion to recognize that other people may not be able to control it. Right. And actually encourage others to seek help as we would if we have a physical illness in terms of, a heart issue or a gut issue or another kind of issue, to be more sympathetic, to actually just stop saying like, oh, you should just do X, Y, and Z and everything will be okay. But to actually say, hey, you know what? Maybe something needs to be checked further. Maybe we need to actually go see what's going on, and maybe even encourage someone by saying, you'll go with them. That you'll actually kind of say, I think, like you said before, if we keep it stigmatized, we're only kind of encouraging the reality that people shouldn't go.
Yeah.
But if we take that stigma away and we stop looking at it as if it's some like, oh, you are extra sick. Yeah. If it's your mind that's sick. But if it's just the fact that you have a broken arm, well, go to the doctor. You've got a broken arm. But if you got this thing over here, that's really bad. Well, no, let's stop kind of looking at them as different things, but actually recognizing that they are on some level, like you said, physiological things that our physical body's going through. And let's encourage people to actually say, let's go get help.
I actually encourage everyone to go to counseling, just like everyone goes and gets their yearly physical and checks on everything. I advise a lot of the pre-med students who are going to med school after they leave Southeastern. And I encourage all of them to seek counseling here at Southeastern to get into the habit of talking to someone before things get stressful and out of hand. And so just like everybody goes for their yearly physical, it's okay if you're healthy to go get a checkup and talk through things and go to counseling. And some of us do this informally and don't even realize it when we're talking with our friends and we're venting and we're kind of processing things. And so getting mental health checkups is also totally okay, even if you're not in a depressive state or in a manic state, or getting checkups are a good thing.
I love that too, because I mean, I think about myself. I go to get my yearly checkup, and then I'm like showing the doctor, like, you see this spot? Is that okay? Like, you see over here, is like, is that fine? Is this the way this should be working? Like, I'll ask 1,000 questions about my body in terms of kind of like, you know, is this spot? Does this look weird? Like, because I'm curious, I want to make sure that I'm being healthy.
Right.
Yet sometimes we won't do that in terms of our mental health. We won't say, I'm having these thoughts. Is this okay?
Is this okay?
Is this normal? Or should I actually go like seek help? Like actually, and I think if we would just even ask those questions more often, like we might be more willing to go like, no, things are not okay. Let's go get help.
Yeah. And so I know Dr. Franklin is an avid runner.
I am an avid runner.
Yes. Yeah, so share
a year into it.
Share a little bit about that, and then how can our listeners connect with you on your social media platforms, maybe, or some of your research?
So I actually I have not shared this publicly with many people, so I feel like this is a good avenue to do it. Yeah,
this is fun. I'm excited.
You mentioned running, but I actually started running. I had my second son. I have two little boys. Silas is 4 and Elijah is 2. And I had a really rough first year after my second son. And looking back, I can recognize that I was going through postpartum depression. I didn't recognize it while I was in it. I can look back and see myself and remember myself saying out loud to others, I feel like I'm drowning. I feel overwhelmed. I feel like I can't breathe. I just feel like I'm just buried in stress, and there's no end to it. And I needed help, but I didn't know I needed help. But what happened was I actually made a deal with one of my students that I knew I needed to do something. And so I made a deal with one of my students that if they studied really hard for the MCAT, which is the entrance exam for medical school, and if they got a certain score, that I would run a half marathon. So I did not do it with the idea of, I'm depressed, I should probably start exercising and it will help me. I did it as she's a runner, I want to encourage her to study, so I'll do a half marathon if she does this. So she of course made the score. She's in medical school now. And so last August, I started training for a half marathon. And what I realized quickly was that it benefited my personal life completely. I did it just to check a box. Like, I told her I'd run a half marathon, I'm going to run a half marathon. But as I started training, I realized that it was a form of self-care. I was able to actually... I was taking care of myself physically, but more than that, because I didn't really lose weight. There were physical benefits, but more than that, I actually started taking time for myself for the first time since my son had been born. So I was 3 times a week. I was, getting an hour to 2 hours while I was running, and that was a form of self-care, taking care of myself. That it's a space where my students don't need me. My husband takes care of the kids, and he's very supportive. So my kids don't need me. Stephen doesn't need me, and I get to just focus on me for 2 hours on every Saturday while I go for my run. So
2 hours.
Well, some runs. So those
are the long runs.
So I realized what started off was a way to just motivate a student and form a bond with a student turned into a life-changing event that actually kind of helped me come out of that postpartum depression. So I've continued running. It's now, so I started last August. This is September. So it's 13 months. I've run 3 half marathon races, a couple 5Ks, and I'm currently training for a 48-mile challenge in January.
Ooh, nope.
Yeah, so it's actually the Dopey Challenge at Disney. So I'll be running a 5K on Thursday, a 10K on Friday, a half marathon on Saturday, and a full marathon on Sunday. So I went from never running. Yes. Yeah.
But things I will never do.
The point of that, the goal of that is not the running, it's the self-care aspect. So because my life was so changed by that, we've actually started a club in our college called it's called Fit Finding It together, and we're actually encouraging self-care in our students.
Yeah.
And trying to
They
find
allow segways. I'm a
segways.
beast on a Segway.
Some allow strollers, so I could maybe push you in a stroller.
Hey, let's
the
go.
Disney
Yes.
ones do not, but I
I'll
bet
go
we could
just for that.
find
Just
one.
go.
I've got
6'1", tons of fun on the stroller.
I've got a nice big Bob double stroller that I think
Let's
you would
go.
fit in. Yeah.
As long as I get Mott's snacks, fruit snacks.
Yes. We'll work out some
Let's go.
fruit snacks and some Gatorade. Maybe we'll see.
You'll
Juice
do
box.
all the eating while she's doing all the
Yeah,
running.
you'll do the
Right.
fueling. You'll
Yeah.
fuel and I'll push you. Yeah.
Yes.
What I love about that is the fact that, I don't love it, but what I love about the story is the reality that, like, it's something that you didn't even know, like you
Right.
expressed, like you didn't even know you were going through it. And I think so many of our listeners actually need to hear that. I think
Yeah.
a lot of people just need to hear that it's not like even something that you can just say, oh yeah, I'm going through this. Like
Right.
sometimes you
Yeah.
don't even know it. You can't even name it for yourself that you're
Right.
going through something. And there are these things,
Yeah.
these ways of getting healthy that need to be encouraged.
Yeah. I don't know where I would be at right now had I not by chance made that deal and started running. And I don't know. I might still be in it.
Yeah.
Hopefully I would have sought help but I don't know. Fortunately, I randomly made a deal with a student to run, and it was a life-changing decision for me. But I didn't go into it thinking I'm going to do this because I'm depressed and it's
Right.
going to help me.
Right.
I can just look back retroactively and see that it truly was.
Yeah.
And now I love it. It's so addictive. You also get that big squirt of dopamine on your brain, the reward system, when you cross the finish line and get the medal. And so
I get a big heaping of pain when I do it. So.
No, it's great. It's a lot of fun.
Aaron did the LA Marathon last year or in the spring?
In the spring, yeah. And that's the last time I'll do that.
Yeah, so you're a runner. You're done? One and done?
No, I do like running, but marathons, that's just not my...
Yeah.
I'll stick
My
to-
plan is to do 2 marathons and then I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm doing one with Dopey, but that will be after I have already run, over 20 miles in the previous 3 days. So I want to do one more just to see how fast I can do it. And then I will go back to half marathons.
That's it. I had my one, here's my
Yeah.
time I need to beat. And if I can
I'm
do
done.
this, I'm
Yeah.
done. And I beat it by a few minutes. And I said, we're good.
Yeah. Maybe triathlons will be my next.
Let's go.
Yeah, those are
My
fun.
next
Those are very
goal.
fun.
Those are a
Those
lot
very
of fun.
fun.
How can our listeners, not to segue to use that word again, but how can our listeners connect with you, find your research?
Yeah, so I'm on the Southeastern website in the College of Natural and Health Sciences. Yeah, I'd
Awesome.
love for people to reach out. I also really, I tell my students, I love sports just as much as I love the brain. So if you want to email me and talk about football, we can do that too. So yeah, it doesn't have to be
She's a Cardinals fan.
Huge St. Louis Cardinals fan. We lost in 19 innings last night to the Arizona
19?
Diamondbacks.
Yes,
19.
yes.
I don't
Our
pay attention to
magic
sports
number
enough,
is 3
apparently.
right now. I really needed us to win that game, but it's okay. We've clinched a playoff spot, but I'd really like to win the division.
I can't wait to see you guys maybe in the World Series. I don't know.
We'll see.
Let's go Yankees.
Yeah.
We're doing good.
I want to say let's go
sometimes
but
I-
I don't watch baseball.
Sometimes I
so-
forget Gomez is a Yankees fan, and I can't believe we're friends, but I guess.
It's all right. Most people
And
say
I lived in
most
St.
people
Louis
say
for
they
10
can't
months.
believe
Come
they're
on, that's why
friends.
we're friends.
I look past his faults.
10 months in St. Louis. I lived.
Yeah.
So
We appreciate having you on. Thanks so much
Absolutely.
for taking the time to have this conversation with us, and we'll talk to you guys
Yeah,
soon.
thank you for having me.
Yeah.